Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this right here is the Moondrop Quarks. At least I think it's the Quarks. If I say Sparks by accident, I apologize. But this is Moondrop's latest IEM, and it's a single dynamic driver earphone with some specs that might look familiar. And I don't know, none of that to me is really what is stand out here about the Quarks. What's stand out about the Quarks, and you probably hear because you saw it in the title of this video, is this is a $13 IEM. That's right, $13, which, I mean, Moondrop, they've got stuff at a bunch of different price points from 20 bucks up to 700 bucks, 1,000 bucks, whatever. 13 bucks, this I think is a new low for them in terms of price. So yeah, I'm pretty interested to check this thing out and what this is going to be in this video. Look, this is not going to be a full review. If you're here for the review, hold your horses, subscribe to the channel. Don't drop it. Subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell so that YouTube will let you know when I'm live with the review. But for now, this is just going to be a first look. We're going to unbox the Quarks. I'll throw out my measurement rig so we can take a frequency response measurement of it and compare it to some other stuff. But like always, I just want to give it the caveat that frequency response is not 100% of how you evaluate sound. It's usually a good indicator of whether or not something is the right flavor, but it's not going to tell you how good it sounds. That I'm going to have to wait for the review. But for now, I guess let's just go ahead and jump into the box here of the Moondrop Quarks. And as I spin this thing, a quick shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending this thing in for review. Here you go. It comes in a very simple, an understated package. Actually, this is pretty classy for Moondrop. I don't want to say Moondrop's not always classy, but they've got a bit of a reputation, and this, well, they've somehow resisted their reputation, which I won't go into. But anyway, so very nice, simple, small black box. Kind of reminds me of something like the AirPods might come in, except for black. We'll do a quick tour of the box. Probably not too much that we'll find out. But let's see. We do have a pure Moondrop logo on this side. I believe we have the Quarks name. And there we got some 3-dot logo, which actually kind of reminds me of like Final Audio's logos, which is interesting. And then around here in the back, we've got a spoiler. This is the frequency response that Moondrop has produced. But when you are looking, it's actually just kind of maybe a good time to talk about this. When you're looking at frequency response graphs, whether it's from Moondrop, whether it's from me, whether it's from Critical, a good thing to keep in mind is that it's generally not advised to compare frequency response graphs from multiple sources, right? So if you're looking at Moondrop's frequency response graph, I have no doubt this is an accurate graph, but you should be comparing this to Moondrop's other graphs. If you want to compare the Quarks frequency response to, let's say, the Tantrum Tanya, I wouldn't go based on their frequency response graphs. I would look for some third-party frequency response graphs where people have taken measurements of two different IEMs on the same rig, because that's pretty important. But that is a bit of a digression here. If you're curious about the specs, let's see, they claim 20 to 20,000 hertz, pretty typical stuff, 116 decibels VRMS, which again, I think these are probably not the most sensitive. 16 ohms of impedance, but I don't know. None of that is especially interesting to me. What's interesting is what's inside. So let's find out what we get for 13 bucks. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Moondrop got me. They didn't put the anime characters on the outside, but they did put it on the inside, and I don't know. It's I guess one of the tamer ones. A little bit of a guide on how to fit the IM, which is interesting. I don't know, does Moondrop normally do this? A schematic diagram of the ear canal cross section. If you're new to IMs, I think that's useful. If you're not new to IMs, probably not that useful. And this, maybe 13 bucks, could be a pretty good introduction to a lot of people to IMs. But there you go. You have the Quarks just sitting there in the open in the box here. But let's see how this thing unboxes. I imagine there's probably not going to be a lot in here for 13 bucks, but we'll find out. Oh, they did manage to throw in a carry case. That was nice of Moondrop. Let's throw this stuff to the side. We do have an elaborated instruction manual. There's a warranty card. I don't know. Not that interested in the paperwork, but they do also include, this is that little carry bag I was talking about, which is actually kind of cool. I think kind of got a similar thing with something like the Moondrop spaceship. It's bare bones, it's simple, it's not going to provide a lot of protection, but if you're looking for something to throw your IMs into a bag or something like that and not lose them, that's actually pretty convenient. And then it looks like the ear tips that we get here are pretty typical Moondrop fare. They seem to include the same ear tips regardless of which IEM you get, for the most part at least. And yeah, these are pretty standard Moondrop ear tips, which are generally pretty decent ear tips, you know, as far as free ear tips go. Some free ear tips are just a little bit on the plasticky kind of hard side, and these I find are generally pretty good. I don't find myself usually swapping out Moondrop ear tips unless I'm trying to improve, let's say, the fit. I'm generally pretty happy with the comfort level on them, but it is neither here nor there as we dive into the Quarks itself. And it looks like I can unbox it by, how do I do this? Interesting. Let's see. I can navigate this packaging. Throw you to the side, my friend. Oh, it's nice that they actually included a branded Velcro tie. I kind of expected for 13 bucks you'd just get, you know, a little cheap twist tie or something like that. But that's actually pretty nice. A little branded Moondrop Velcro tie. Throw that to the side. And then here you go with the IM itself. And don't be too surprised here. The Moondrop Quarks, and this is the thing I knew about it before opening it up, but it does not have a removable cable. A lot of IEMs obviously have removable cables, especially as you're spending, you know, $100 in plus. You kind of expect to be able to replace the cable. Here with the Moondrop Quarks, the cable is pre-installed and stuck on the earpieces. But I suppose, I mean, if you needed to replace this, 13 bucks to replace the entire thing is going to be cheaper than pretty much any cable you would buy anyway. But there you have it. Take a look at the Quarks earpieces. These things are, in case it's not clear, these things are tiny, right? There is my fingernail. That is how large the Quark is relative to my fingernail. And I think it's actually kind of a cool look. I like the clear translucent plastic. I like being able to see inside. It's not necessarily like the tidiest, cleanest look or anything like that. In fact, there's like some print here on the outside, which, let's see if I can get that to show up on camera. It's the 3 circles, but it also looks like, almost looks like a face like yelling at me. That's a little confusing. Here's a black version of it. But yeah, I don't know. It's a very simple IM. Let me unfurl this cable. I tried to give it the rotary wrap to see how well we could get it to behave. I'll be honest, this cable on first impression is obviously a little memory prone, you can tell. We'll see how well that works itself out during the review process. But the cable, I don't know. It seems like a pretty, this is about what you would expect for a $13 cable. It's a little on the soft side, which is good. You know, some of these cables can be a little bit stiff. And I would also say this is actually maybe even a little bit thick, which is kind of nice. So soft and thick. Maybe you wouldn't expect that necessarily on a cheap IM cable, but the fact that it's so memory prone, that is about what you would expect. They do, of course, they did manage to include Moondrop's sort of signature Y-split, which, if I'm perfectly honest, Moondrop, my feedback to you, this thing is too large, but not honestly a big issue. And then, of course, you've got 2 thinner strands up top. Let me go ahead and throw on a set of ear tips, and typically with Moondrop, their medium ear tips are what will fit me well. And we'll do a little bit of a fit test before I throw this thing on the measuring rig. But maybe as I'm doing this, I'll also talk about the bullet style, which is what these things are, right? This is an IEM with a very simple design. We call this a bullet style. And with that comes kind of the option to wear these either hanging down or over ear. And so I'll show you kind of like the obvious way that you wear these is you just plug them into your ear like so. Let's see if I can fit that in and then give you the close-up. Obviously a very, very tiny fit. You can imagine these things being pretty good for sleeping. It is inside of, what do we call this? The tragus or something like that. It is inside of that. So really quite a flush fit in general. And I would also say that sound isolation is stronger than I would have expected with something this small. Hopefully I wasn't talking overly loud. But the other way that you can fit a bullet style IM like this is wearing it over ear, which is typically how I like to wear in ears like this. Let's go and punch back in on that so you can take a look. But I like to wrap it around the back of my ear and then drop it in from the top for a couple of reasons. One, if there are any issues with microphonics, right? If the cable rubbing up against your jacket, your shirt, whatever, can sometimes transmit as sort of vibration noise into the earphone. Wearing it cable down tends to exacerbate that, whereas wearing it over your ear kind of acts as a damper for the cable, reducing those microphonics. The second reason that I like wearing it like this is it also just makes it more secure, right? So if anything tugs on the cable, it's gonna first tug on the outside of my ear before it tugs on the fit inside the ear canal, whereas if it's fitted inside here, it's gonna tug immediately on the ear canal. But yeah, that is probably about as much as I can tell you about the Moondrop Quarks at this point, because I can't hear it right now, or I haven't heard it right now. Can't tell you what it sounds like, but what we can do is throw it up on my frequency response measuring rig, which we will do right now, and I'll pull that into view. So this is the little microphone that I use for measuring the frequency response of earphones. This is the Quarks. We're going to hook it up, and we are going to see what the frequency response of this is. Going to connect it in over there. And I'm actually not totally certain how to pick the left and right here. I'm going to guess that the red color is right, which actually makes me think, is there a way to feel the difference between these pieces? And just based on feel, there doesn't seem to be any obvious differentiator, which could be a problem for putting these things in the night, but well, we'll deal with that later. Let's go ahead and drop in the left earpiece here. And I did just notice too that there isn't a leaf blower going on outside, hopefully not intruding here on the live stream. But let's pop on over to here. This is the tool. This is a software that we use for measuring frequency responses. This is called RU. And let's go ahead and attempt to produce the frequency response. So I'll give it the usual like 50% volume level. I've got this thing inserted about that far. And if all goes well, I hit this button, we'll get a frequency response that looks like what we expect. That looks like a frequency response. All right, so this aspect ratio is a little messed up. Let me shrink this thing to size so it looks a little bit better. And then I also want to make sure that my resonance peak is kind of happening about where I expect, right? I try to get these things, depending on how deep you fit the IM in the coupler, there's going to be a bit of a resonance peak. Like you're going to see in a lot of frequency response graphs, there is a peak at around 8K hertz. And that really actually varies depending on how deeply you insert the IM into the coupler. Here it looks like we're probably at about 8K, but I'm going to try it at a couple of different depths just to see it, where that thing shows up. So here's a little bit shallower of a depth. I would expect this to move any resonance up a little bit. Let's see what happens. All right, so you can see the difference in the frequency response up here in this sort of a 7 to 8K region. You can see that they're starting to rise around like 6 to 7K, whereas previously it was a little bit flat through there and maybe a little bit more elevated here at 8K, which means I think the first graph was actually probably pretty good. But just for certainty's sake, I'm actually going to go ahead and insert this a little bit deeper and see what that does for the resonance peak. Do one more measurement, but I think we're probably pretty good with that first one. All right, let me go ahead and disable the second one. So here you can see now we're starting to develop a peak right around here, which is at around 9K. So I think that this first measurement was probably the good one. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now, because this is, we're looking at a graph here now in isolation. Before I get into analyzing it, I actually want to export it to squig.link, which if you're not familiar with it, there is a link in the description down below, or you can just type in squig.link. And I am going to upload this to there in real time. So let me go ahead and export the measurement. Moondrop Quarks L. Okay, I think that's good. Let me go ahead and go over here and upload it. We're doing it live as we do. Moondrop Quarks. Not Moondrop Sparks, which I have made that mistake in the past, if you'll forgive me. And then one last file to upload. All right, so if we did that correctly, that's a big if. Now if we jump over here to squig.link and I refresh this, let's see. I need to shift refresh this. Blam, there we go. We've got our measurement of the Moondrop Quarks. And the reason I wanted to pull it into squig.link is for a couple of reasons. One, this is just where all of my frequency response measurements are. And as I was talking about kind of in the intro to the video, as we were getting into and looking at the frequency response that's on the back of this box, I mentioned that when you're comparing graphs, you want to compare graphs that were made on the same rig, because rigs are actually different. If you take the same earphone, plug it into multiple different rigs, like if I take my earphone, plug it into Precog Vision's measurement rig, he's going to get a slightly different frequency response than I'm going to get. So that's why, you know, when you're comparing them, if you're trying to figure out which is brighter, which is more neutral, which has more bass, you want to compare from the same rig. And all of these graphs here on squig.link were made with my measurement rig, so it's worth comparing here. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out is that you see this gray dotted line that we have here? This is essentially my neutral target. To me, let me go ahead and hide the Quarks graph for a second. This gray dotted line is what to me sounds essentially neutral. And so when you pull up another frequency response, let's say the Moondrop Quarks, like we've got here, you can start to make some comparisons, right? Start to predict how I might interpret the sound here on the Quarks. And based on this, you know, the first thing that stands out to me is that there is, you know, slightly elevated mid-bass. Doesn't look like a lot. Doesn't look like something like the Tantrum Tanya, which had pretty significantly elevated mid-bass, but this does look like it has a fair bit of mid-bass. The sub-bass rolls off maybe a smidge, but actually not too bad. That's frankly pretty nice looking. So I would say, honestly, from the lower mid-range to the mid-bass with a slight bit of mid-bass boost into the sub-bass, this looks roughly neutral. If we go into the upper mid-range area, this is where we start to see a little bit more kind of obvious deviation. So we do get a peak in the upper mid-range at around, I don't know, let's call it 3K, which, you know, I think for me, my neutral peak is at around 2.5K, so not too far off, but honestly looks pretty in line with what I would expect. But then down here in sort of this presence region, or maybe even kind of in between the upper mid-range and the presence region, you can start to see where the Quarks frequency response dips a little bit. So I'm going to guess that that's going to make it sound maybe slightly on the dark side. Not super dark, because you can see as we get into the mid-treble, there's actually a little bit of elevation. And that resonance peak at 8K does not appear to be significant at all. And then the air frequencies, I don't know, pretty predictably drop off, but that's about what you would expect for most IEMs, and definitely for most budget IEMs. But there you go. So I would say that roughly what we're looking at here is some version of neutral. I would call this probably like a warm neutral, versus something like the Moondrop Spaceship, which I can also bring that up. Right, we can filter this, add in the spaceship frequency response graph. This is Moondrop's their previous sort of budget single dynamic driver earphone. You can see that, you know, the spaceship has pretty significantly rolled off sub bass compared to the Quarks, and then quite a bit more in this mid treble and presence region and upper mid range. Like, just, it looks like the spaceship is quite a bit brighter, whereas the Quarks is a little bit on the warmer side. In fact, I'm kind of curious, how does this stack up to something like the SSP? And you can see, all right, bass honestly looks better to me on the Quarks than the SSP. And then the upper mid range honestly looks pretty good. Let me jump over to the Tanya, which is another budget single dynamic driver earphone. This one from Tonch Gym came out earlier this year. Make sure that color is decently contrasty and readable. Blue, come on, green. All right, we'll deal with green. And here you can see, this is where I was talking about the Tanya being pretty mid-bassy. You know, you can see that. Let's see. Here and here. The Tanya is just a very bassy IM. And we can change where this thing aligns. So maybe it helps us illustrate exactly how bassy this thing is. But then you can also see, you know, up here in the upper mid-range, the Tanya is a little bit pulled back. I don't know, the Tanya just kind of gives me a bit of a warm, it's pretty warm. It's a little bit on the underwater side of warm, but pretty nice bass if that's what you're going for. And it looks like the Quarks is going to be an alternative to the Tanya with a very significantly different sound signature, leaning more towards a warm neutral versus a warm sort of V shape. And so that is about as much as I can tell you about the Moondrop Quarks. Like I said, if you're interested in the full review, that will be coming. Subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and hang out for a couple of weeks because I had to spend some time living with this thing and comparing it to the Tanya, the spaceship, and I think those are going to be kind of my main benchmarks at this time. If you found this video helpful, if you liked it, subscribe to the channel already. Ding the, I already said this stuff. Please hit the like button though. And if you're not already subscribed, please do. I will catch you on the next super review. If you're here live, you have any questions about the Quarks or anything else that we've talked about, stick around. Let's have a chat. So yeah, let me pull up live chat and catch up as best as possible. What's going on? All right, the initial shout outs. Thanks for showing up early. Rob Hawk, how you doing? Shenzai, always good to see you. Not Daijobu. So if you're not Daijobu, do I really know who you are? But good to see you there as well. Subby Base, what's up? You're saying you heard they got a little extra 3K to please me. And for just clarification's sake, that little 3K that Subby Base is referring to is right here. Let's go ahead and hide the Tanya. We don't need to see you for now. But that little peak right there. You know, this is not as much 3K as something like the Darling, which I'll pull up for reference, right? The Moondrop Darling is very much a 3K forward IEM. And not in a bad way for me. I find the Darling actually is a very nice solid tonality. A little bit on, it's like kind of like a dark V-shape sound signature where this 3K peak and the bass boost give it like this nice contrasty sound, but you can see that the presence region, mid treble, lower treble, mid treble are all kind of actually a little bit relaxed on the Darling, which gives it that little sense of laid back darkness, despite the fact that it has a very strong upper mid range peak. But you can see that comparing the peaks, the little 3K peaks, the Quarks actually looks more relaxed than the Darling. So maybe it's there for me. Maybe it's there for everybody. Martin Ferrer, what's up? Nice to see you there as well. Again. Eddie Catboy saying, I want to know how this compares to the Tonch Gym Tanya, and I think a lot of people do, and including myself. So I'm not going to be able to make that comparison apart from the frequency response graphs, which we just went over. But I will definitely make sure that discussion is a major part of the review, which should come in like a week or two. Sai, hello. Nice to see you again. David K, happy Tuesday. Planet Jace, happy Wednesday morning. Are you time traveling again? It's Australian magicians. Shenzai saying, I like the look of the box. Yeah, I think, let's jump back to this box. Pretty handsome, pretty simple packaging. Honestly, look, IM manufacturers, I appreciate that, you know, a lot of times you go out of your way to make really nice packaging, but in my opinion, you really don't need much more than this. I'm perfectly happy. If I paid for an $800 Moondrop S8 and it came in this box, I'd probably honestly be just as happy. Susie Bond saying, ho, ho, ho. I don't know what to make of that, but maybe Santa Claus. Von Peps, what's up? Nice to see you there. Von Peps saying, looks pretty neutral and brilliant. Yeah, I'm honestly, one thing that's kind of neat about the that frequency response graph is there's really not a lot of neutral IMs in the budget space, like under $100. The closest stuff, I mean, there's the Etymotic stuff, which is now kind of dropped in price below $100, but for the most part, there's not a lot of neutral stuff out there. You could call the Moondrop SSR neutral. It's a bit of a colored version of a neutral. This to me seemed, based purely on the frequency response graph, to actually be a closer neutral match than something like the SSR, which I'm pretty intrigued by that. For 13 bucks, huh. A Frieza A, I made it. Glad you can make it. Nice to see you there. Juan, nice to see you there too. Looking forward to having you back in the area. Freppy Punk NYC asking, does it come with a microphone? And the answer is no. There's no microphone here on the Quarks, which I think is actually worth calling out. Not that I personally ever use microphones on IEMs, but I know some people, especially in kind of like this budget range, tend to be interested in microphones. And from what I can tell, there is no microphone option here for the Quarks. The Tanch Gym Tanya, which we were comparing this to earlier, it's a little bit more expensive. It's like $22 to $25. But that does come with the option of adding a microphone. So it's like a couple bucks extra to get it with a microphone. The Quarks here, it's just 13 bucks without a microphone, and there's no option to add a microphone to it. But good question. Thanks for asking that one. Not Daijobu saying this is like the anti-E500. The E500 is Pinalet. The Quarks is all Pin again. Yeah, in fact, that was not a comparison we did here with the graphs, but let me go ahead and pull that up. In the sub $30 price bracket, the final E500, is my personal favorite. And I did a review, when I did my review of the Tanya is kind of when I talked about this. Let me change that color again. Can we get a red? Nope, we're just gonna stick with green. Okay. Yeah, you can tell pretty different frequency response graphs here between the Quarks and the E500. The E500 is a very nice sounding IEM for 25 bucks. Hard to beat. But just purely based on this frequency response, like I might prefer the Quarks. That's interesting. You can tell, what not Daijobu was referring to is this right here, where the green line, this is the final E500, has much more relaxed, we're gonna call this the vocal region. So I think the vocals on the Quarks are gonna sound more forward now. How well they're done, that's the stuff that we can't really tell from the frequency response graph, but just purely based on the graph, I think I prefer the balance of the Quarks. And then also notable is that this difference in the sub bass, where, honestly, I think the bass on the E500 is pretty solid, but it does roll off a little bit. And it's interesting here that the Quark stays pretty flat, pretty neutral. That's pretty impressive. Anch is asking Moondrop SSR or even SSP versus Aria. I'm asking because I can bump the price, but would it be worth it? Any other recommendations? Here's what I would recommend, Anch. Check out squig.link/list. In fact, we can do this in real time. Come over here. Actually, if you're on squig.link, just click the rankings button up top. That will bring you to my tool for hopefully answering your question, right? So let's say you're looking at Moondrop Sparks or Moondrop SSR and Moondrop Aria. It sounds like your price range is around, let's say 30 bucks to 100 bucks, right? So turn on these filters. Here I've got this thing sorted by my favorite IMs in these price ranges, right? So up to 50 bucks, Moondrop SSR, Moondrop Crescent, Rip Crescent, no longer available, but the SSR is my personal favorite. Now, you asked about the Aria, so that's going to be in the next price bracket. So if I scroll down to up to $100, you can see in this price bracket, Well, the Stardust is a lot like the SSR. I still consider that a 5-star at that price bracket. And then the Aria, well, for my preferences, I would call it a 4-star. But I think you need to make up your own mind a little bit. So watch my reviews. Get acquainted with these. These are the frequency responses, right? So this is what the frequency response of the Aria looks like. A very kind of warm, laid back, mild V, you could call it, maybe a really warm neutral, versus something like the Moondrop Stardust. I call this kind of a bright neutral. Less bass, more upper mid-range, more treble. Whether or not that's to your preference, I don't know. I can only tell you what's to my preference. I prefer the Stardust and the SSR, but my preferences are not everybody. So take a look at that tool, check it out, and hopefully it helps you make a better purchase decision. Sai saying that the cylinder shape of the IMs looks cool and the transparency adds to it too. Yeah, I don't know. I gotta be honest. It's a simple looking IM, but if I can get the kinks in this cable to wear out, I'm pretty into the look. I mean, it's cheap. Yeah, it's definitely cheap. It's not premium build quality, but for 13 bucks, it is really hard to complain about what we've got here. And frankly, it's pretty handsome. A nice beater IM. We'll see when we hear it. Roy saying that's a cool looking watch you got there. Well, if you're curious, this is a Pebble 2. This is a smartwatch from literally 5 years ago. Still my favorite smartwatch. Not Daijobu saying it looks better than cost cables. I think you're probably right. Ethan, I see you asking about, are there any Aria owners that have warping or twisting issues with the stock cable? And that is a thing that I have heard. I've seen other people have that issue because the Aria cable is wrapped in fabric. It seems like that though, when people are winding them up, it's having the effect that it's kind of like twisting the silicone cable inside of the fabric wrapping different than it is wrapping or twisting the fabric wrapping, and that's resulting in just this weird warping effect. If that's already happened to your cable, I don't know that there's going to be much that you can do to improve upon it. I mean, you can try and work on it and straighten it out, but it might be a little bit hosed. If you're trying to avoid it getting worse, what I would recommend is the roadie wrap. It's not necessarily going to guarantee that you're not going to have that problem, but part of the reason why I do this particular wind on my cables is to avoid that twisting, right? And so what I do is, rather than sort of forcing the cable to twist this way, I essentially like twist it myself so that it's sort of the effect of, let's say I put this thing on a spool and I just kind of like wound it, right? You're avoiding any sort of lateral torsion on it. And what I do is I do it like that. I do over under. I have a video about this. I actually recommend checking out the video. I explain it probably better in that than I will here, but practice the roadie wrap, because I do think this will spare a lot of cable problems like what you're describing with the Aria. Again, if your Aria already has those problems, that might not solve them. I don't think it's going to help, but it will help prevent the problem from getting worse. Oh, I like Squig Time, not Daijobu. It's going to be a new chant. Elazar saying I would pick this IM up just so it can help me determine the kind of sound signature I'm looking for in an IM. Does that make sense? How can I understand more about types of drivers? Okay, I think that's a really good question. And honestly, as I was getting into audio myself, I was much more interested in learning, like, what are the different sound signatures? What do they sound like? What are the different driver types? What do those sound like? I was much more interested in learning than I was interested in optimizing, if that makes sense. So for me, when I was first getting into audio, it wouldn't really make sense to spend $300, $500 on an earphone because I didn't know what I liked. And there's a good chance I would spend $300, $500 and people would tell me that's a really good earphone and that's what I should be happy with. But I'm the kind of person that definitely wants to know for myself, and I guess to your point, like you're kind of asking, like, how do you figure that kind of stuff out for yourself? And I think something like the Moondrop Quarks, honestly, this is a pretty good way to figure out, do you like a warm, neutral sound signature? And maybe this isn't even that warm. We'll figure out when I listen to this. I would say the final E500, very much a warm, neutral sound signature. This looks a little bit closer to pure neutral, so maybe a little bit stronger on clarity, a little bit more forward, and a little bit less laid back, but still a little bit warm in the bass. And yeah, I think, try out something like this. Try out the Moondrop SSR. These are sort of different versions. I don't know. Let's say, and then, let's start with this. Let's say you have the Moondrop, or no. Let's say you have the Blonde BL03. It's just like this really warm, bassy sound. And then maybe here, one step over, you've got something like the final E500. It's warm but more neutral. Maybe next you've got something like the Moondrop Quarks, where it's still kind of warm neutral but starting to edge more into that upper mid-range forwardness. And then you can take the Moondrop Spaceship or the Spaceship or the SSR as a more forward, brighter kind of version of neutral. And that will kind of represent, for under $100, I think you could get all of those. That could kind of represent a decent swath of, sound signatures. Now, that's not going to represent everything out there, but I think that'll start to give you a good sense of how much do you really want a bassy sound like a BL03? When you listen to something like the Moondrop SSR, are you giving up on that bass, and do you miss it? And if not, maybe you like some happy in between, or maybe you just figure out that you like the extremes, and then from there, you can then start optimizing your sound preferences, or optimizing toward your sound preferences by spending more money on something that are maybe a little bit more technically competent. Now, the other part of your question was about driver types, balanced armatures versus dynamic drivers, and that one's a little bit trickier because I don't find that one, it's kind of tricky because there's not a lot of budget balanced armatures that sound that great. So it's a little hard to figure that out. But also, I don't know how the BAs do with the BA timbre is a little bit variable depending on which driver or which earphone you're listening to. Trying to think just offhand, what's a good budget balanced armature set? I know there's the KB Ear Neon, which some folks recommend. I have not heard that myself, but maybe that could be a good way into experiencing balanced armature for not too much money. All right, that was a long answer. I need a drink of water. Not Daijobu saying, I suspect Quarks is pretty darks. I added that extra S on there, sorry. Taking liberties, because I've got the microphone. Not Daijobu, yeah, you're saying, so it looks like this commentary is as we were making the frequency response and measurement comparisons, you say this is much less 3K hertz than I expected. And yeah, honestly, the 3K peak here on the Quarks, it seems reasonable. I'll give the caveat too that my measurement rig, and back to the point of measurement rigs being a little bit different, my measurement rig tends to pick up a little bit less in sort of the 1 to 2.5K than some other measurement rigs. So I wouldn't be surprised if some other graphs show more elevation there. But when you're comparing it to other IMs that hopefully you're familiar with that are on squig.link, that should give you a pretty good sense. And yeah, the 3K peak on here, not as extreme as something like the Tanchjim Darling. Martin Ferrer, I think I saw you saying something about buying a bunch of Sparks and giving them out to family. That would be interesting because, well, obviously it's budget enough that you could give it away as a gift, and if they like it, awesome. If they don't like it, okay, it's $13. But I don't know, maybe this is not a concern anymore, but I'm just trying to think before I got into in-ear monitors, the entire idea of an IM, an earpiece that seals inside my ear, was actually initially uncomfortable. Maybe people are getting more used to that stuff, especially with true wireless that's blowing up, right? AirPods Pro, that is an IM. It does create a seal. So yeah, maybe people are just getting more used to that. Elazar saying, I wish it has lower bass and higher up in the mids, 3 to 1 kHz, more of a mid-range piece. You might like the Moondrop SSR. Wu Jin Lee saying, looks pretty nice, not too bassy and not too wonky and not harsh peaks. Yeah, I agree. The graph of the Quarks is pretty impressive for a $13 earphone. Simon, nice to see you there as well. For those who are not familiar, there's a number of folks here in the live chat who are stalwarts of the Super Review Discord community. If you're not already in the Discord community, there's a link in the description down below. I'm there way too much, but yeah, we have good conversations about audio, about cameras lately, and maybe some controversial subjects. But as long as we are all good people to each other, I think we can get along. The Nizu Bizu. What's the best entry level IEM? My personal favorite, I guess it depends on what entry level means for you, but let's say under $30, which is, I think, my lowest price category. The final E500 is my personal pick. But maybe it'll be the Quarks from now on. We'll see. We'll see. Recode, you're saying you're interested in the Quarks. The FR is spot on, and I agree. That's a good-looking graph. That is a good-looking graph. And Sai asking, in terms of comfort and looks, the final E500, the Tanya, or the Quarks. I'm going to say in terms just of pure aesthetics, I'll probably put the Quarks up top, followed by the final E500 and then the Tanya at the bottom. In terms of comfort, I think I probably would have a really hard time differentiating them in my ear. They all are basically the same fit. I don't know, maybe when I'm doing the comparison something will stand out, but I don't really think so. Coffee Beats Official saying 96 watching and only 20 likes. Come on. I agree. Come on, what's going on? If you like the video, hit the like button. It really does help me out. JK asking, do I know if the driver is made in-house by Moondrop? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think most of the drivers in Chi-Fi are made in-house. It seems like a lot of the parts are kind of OEM parts that a lot of the companies share. I don't know anything in particular about the driver that's in here in the Quarks, so it's possible that I'm wrong there, but my guess is that it's probably not. Yeah. Martine saying, my name sounds so cool in English. Am I saying it weird? Coffee Beats Official asking, is this available in India? Well, it's available on Shenzhen Audio's website, and I think they ship worldwide. If not, it should also be on their AliExpress site, which, again, I think it ships worldwide, but I don't know. I don't know the particulars of shipping between China and India. Abel Santiago, thanks for the comments. Thanks for watching. Simon, it's Wednesday there too. Wow, time traveling for sure. Twingwin asking, does the frequency response change with different tips? And the answer is it can. In fact, if you are curious about that sort of thing, let's jump back over here to squig.link. Let's go back to the top, go back to my graph tool. And let's pull up, I don't have different tip measurements here with the Quarks, but I do have some different tip measurements with some other IMs. Let's see, what do I have? The HANA is just one I know that I've got, right? So if I click on the HANA, this is what it looks like with the stock ear tips. And then I was also curious to see how it measured if it was any different with something like the final E-type ear tips. And that's what we have here with the red line. And this, I think, is pretty good indicator of what I typically see when comparing different tips. In fact, let me pull this over to a different ear tip with maybe even a little bit more difference here in the presence region. What I tend to see when I'm trying different ear tips and measuring them is that, you know, upper mid-range, lower mid-range, mid-bass, sub-bass, these tend to not really move much. Where I start to see difference is in the presence, basically lower treble, mid-treble, and air frequencies. And I also give the caveat here that when you're looking at differences here, a lot of this is really up to insertion depth, coupling, and your individual ear canal. So, you know, you could be using the same ear tips. Let's say right here's the Moondrops, right? I've got the mediums on here. I could get similar differences just by swapping to the small ear tips, because that's going to allow the IEM to fit deeper. Or if I switch to the large ear tips, maybe it still fits me, but it's going to fit a little bit shallower, and that can result in an audible difference in treble response and what you hear. And that could be entirely what's going on with, you know, differences that I measure here. You know, this is again me measuring two different tips, entirely different brands of tips on the same IEM and getting different responses. That could just be up to, you know, differences in the insertion depth and the coupling, but it could also be down to, you know, different bore sizes, right? So all of these have the same bore size. You might expect that these would all have the same sound, but again, depending on how deep it fits in your ear, that's going to have as big of an effect, if not more of an effect, than the size of the bore. I don't know, was that a convoluted way to answer your question? The answer is yes, but I think the effect that tips have on the frequency response is going to be kind of variable and unpredictable. My recommendation is just to go with whatever fits you best, and as long as it sounds right, I wouldn't worry about it too much. All right, HP providing a little bit of wordplay for the day. Let's go ahead and give this one a read. Either you quark or you quack. You were still nuts not getting this for 13 bucks. Okay. It's cute. Not Daijobu saying, free E500 with final E-type tips, still the best value. I agree. Although surprisingly, the E500 not available in a lot of markets. I don't know what that's about. On Amazon.com, I can go there right now in the US and have an E500 shipped to me in a couple of days for 25 bucks, which is pretty ridiculous. Vortex Reviews, howdy folks. Howdy, welcome. Ethan S. asking, do I have an affiliate link with Shenzhen? I don't have affiliate links with retailers specifically. What I will do is I will, you know, once the Quarks, I have it up on the Squiglink rankings, there will be links to like AliExpress and Amazon. That's typically where I do my affiliate links. A Job, I have not tried the Blonde T3, no. I don't think I've heard of that one. Planet Jace, I swear I'm not kink shaming. If you're into a kinky cable, there's no problem here. But, I don't know. It's a little memory prone. I have a feeling this is honestly going to work itself out. And in a good way, if you haven't done this before, a good way to sort of accelerate the dememorization of a cable like this is actually to give it the old roadie wrap, right? Get it into a form where you can, let's do this quickly as possible. Give it the old roadie wrap and then hold it in roughly a circular shape and hit it with a hair blow dryer. What that's going to do is it's going to warm up the cable, it's going to soften it, and the kinks that you see in here that are kind of returning this thing to its memory prone shape are going to work themselves out typically, and I have a feeling that's going to happen here with the Quarks. Hopefully I don't heat it up too much though. Juan, you exclusively do the 3-finger torsion twist. Man, you are just asking for trouble. Albert Weedstein, the Thug Genius. First time watching you live. Love your content. Thank you. Oh, well, thanks for watching the Thug Genius. That's a really good name. Do you have a SoundCloud by chance? Jack asking, I read the tag on Squig, but not clear to me, when are vocals nasal, upper mid-range? So, I mean, that's a good question. Let's see if we jump back over here to, I think what you're referring to is, right, I've got these different segments of the frequency response kind of labeled, and you're asking about a nasal quality in frequency response. So let's say, what's an IM to me that sounds a little bit nasally? And I'm trying to think what comes to mind. Like maybe something like the Dunu SA3. And yeah, this could be it. You know, I think where you might start to hear something that sounds a little bit nasal is just when you have an uneven response here in the upper mid-range. Let's say you've got something like this where you get a peak at around, let's say 2K, and then it drops off after this. This is going to give kind of this like forward presentation to the vocals, but then it's also going to have a bit of hollowness because the rest of the upper mid-range is not as filled out as what you had here. And in my experience, that is going to give it a bit of a kind of a nasally quality. It might be more extreme if it was maybe the opposite, if like this was hollowed out and there was more upper mid-range presence region emphasis, but I think this right here is a pretty decent example. Yeah, I'm trying to think, what are some IMs that I have described as nasal? Nothing's coming to mind, but if anything, if you remember anything, or, I don't know, let me know. Oh, Planet Jace asking, so what happens when I have to build a new rig? Do I have to differentiate my measurements? And yes. So this microphone right here, I got to take care of this thing, because if I break this thing, if I do any damage to it and it no longer produces reliable frequency responses, or at least not in line with what I measured before, I'm going to have to essentially start this database over from scratch. Which, I mean, Critical's done that before. I don't think because he damaged it, because he was upgrading his hardware. So I don't know. I guess it's a possibility, and most of these IMs I do still have on hand. But there's a lot of pricey stuff here, like the 64 audio stuff. I don't own this stuff. I'm not going to be able to measure this stuff again easily. So I better take care of my microphone. DJ MXP, punchy bass earphones. Well, that's a very broad question. You're looking for punchy bass, but again, I would recommend going over to squig.link, clicking the rankings link in the header. You can actually filter by sound signature. So if you want bassy neutral, let's say maybe you want, well, let's go V-shape, bassy V, warm V. I think these would all kind of classify as bassy. Maybe even Harman neutral would be bassy. Now here's all your different earphones that I classify as that. Let's say you want to limit it only to the 5 stars, and then you want to set a price range. Let's say 100 to 150 bucks. There you go. 100 to 150 bucks. That's my recommendation for a bassy earphone. But if your price range is different, look, just change this filter and hopefully you'll land on something that fits your price range. That's why I built that tool. Sai, have fun at school. Those are asking, hold up, what is the main difference between the Quarks and the final E500? Well, if you go back just purely based on frequency response graph, which caveat that that is, again, not everything that there is to do with sound, but if we're just comparing the frequency response graphs, I think the biggest difference is going to be here in the upper mid-range, where the Quarks has quite a bit of additional forwardness in the upper mid-range, which makes sense because the E500 is a pretty warm, laid-back tune. I think also, this is maybe the more subtle difference, is here in the treble, the lower and mid-treble region, where, yes, there is a couple of dB difference. That's not necessarily the big difference here. What's the bigger difference is the relation of the lower treble to the upper mid-range. Because the final E500 has pretty relaxed upper mid-range, this treble stands out a little bit more. And it gives it, I think, despite it being kind of a laid-back, warm tune, this lower treble presence keeps it sounding like it's still got a decent sense of definition. Maybe here on the Quarks, because the upper mid-range is quite a bit more forward and the treble is even a little bit lower, it might sound a little bit warmer and maybe a little bit less defined. So that'll have to wait until I actually listen to this thing. And if you want the early impressions on the Discord server, again, link in the description, I have a room set up specifically for the Moondrop Quarks, and that's for us to just talk about the Quarks and anything that comes up in mind. You know, maybe there's some other measurements that should pop up on the internet. Maybe there's other reviews people want to share. But also, I tend to drop in kind of just like early first impressions there. Scarborough, nice to see you there. Those who are not familiar, Scarborough, another IM reviewer, actually focuses on true wireless IMs. Really good blog. And you're asking how does it compare? Unfortunately, I haven't heard the Quarks yet. This is just the first look video, so I haven't actually heard the Quarks. I don't know how it compares to the Aria. We could go here to the frequency response graph and say, all right, make some educated guesses based on the frequency response of the Aria. The Aria here, you can tell, quite a bit more elevated in the sub-bass frequencies. I would say the Aria is going to be probably the warmer tune. You can see also up here in the upper mid-range, the Aria upper mid-range doesn't extend as forward as the Quarks, but then the treble region, I think the treble on the Aria frankly looks better in my tastes. But yeah, I don't know. I would guess that the Aria is going to be quite a bit warmer, bassier, and maybe with still better definition because of that treble presence. But again, that's the sort of thing I can't really tell until I hear it. Same response to you, Jer. I haven't heard the Quarks yet. Is it a good buy? I mean, it's 13 bucks. I have a hard time imagining that it's not worth 13 bucks, but hopefully it sounds like it's worth more than 13 bucks. And folks, I think that's going to do it for the live stream. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for hanging out, for the chat, the conversation. That's the best part of these videos, at least for me. But yeah, if you are interested in the full review of the Moondrop Quarks, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell. YouTube will let you know when I'm live, and the next time I'm live could be the review of the Quarks. If you haven't already, do please hit the like button down below. It really does help me out. And then again, link in the description if you want to check out the Quarks on Shenzhen Audio. Otherwise, I'll catch you on Discord, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Have a good week. Cheers.